Melusine by Reid. Chapter 6, The Oriental Charmer. It was a glorious morning when Roger came out, leaving all his family fast asleep. He saw that a pale gold mist lay over the fields beyond the line of trees. There was another line of what looked like huge gnarled old willows some distance away. Roger wondered if there were a river there. He liked rivers. There was always something interesting to do around a river. The stone giants, the ancient gateposts, stood, as it were, knee-deep in milky mist. One of them had a slight list, where one side of it, unsupported now by gate or wall, had settled into the earth. So they were no longer straight as sentries should be. As Roger, carrying the coil of rope, crossed over where the drive had been and turned his head to look at them, he thought they looked rather sad in the golden morning light, their function gone, just waiting there for nothing except to fall down. Such a notion was unusual for him. He thought it silly, usually, to ascribe human feelings to objects. When Melusine saw the roped-off area, she at once understood what it was for. "Bonne idée!" she said enthusiastically. She said enthusiastically for her. Roger grinned happily, and for a change she grinned back. Her button eyes half closed with the grin, and this made them look more ordinary and much nicer. It changed her whole face in a way that her laugh, which he associated till now with mockery, didn't. He was allowed to milk the first goat, and this time he got nearly all the milk out, though it took a long time and the goat got fed up. After that he resumed his catching and tethering duties, hurrying back every so often to release the goats as she finished them. He got them into the roped-off section by the simple tactic of raising the rope, which was chest-high to the goats, and shoving them underneath it. "Tu m'as épargné beaucoup de temps," she acknowledged as she carried the last pail full into the cool, dry dairy. "Merci." He had saved her time. She owed him then. "Now will you show me the tower?" he asked, quick to take advantage of her mellow mood. She spun around, her eyes wide and unreadable. "Comment?" She understood all right, but to make sure, he said, "Je veux voir la tour." Again he saw that she was about to give him a short, sharp reply, but she stifled it. She turned away, poured the milk into the churn, covered it with the lid, carried the pail out to wash under a standpipe tap. He followed her closely to show the question was still hanging. "Well?" he pressed. "Que c'est? Que tu dis?" She stood very still, turned away from him, then she turned and smiled. "Maybe, but no today. Today I'm going with my father." "Where? To La Rochelle?" "Ah," said Roger, having no idea where that was. But he lost no time in finding out. There was a map of France in the glove compartment of the car, and a few minutes after saying adieu to Melusine, he had this spread out over the hood. The first place he looked, wishful thinking, was the coast, and immediately he found it. It was a town to the west of them, about 1 hour, he reckoned, by a rather good road, right on the sea. And when he looked at the more detailed map of the Vendée region that his father had brought, he saw that just north of the town was what looked like a long beach. "Could we go to the coast today?" he asked carelessly at breakfast. "Yes!" chorused the twins, who, after one day with nothing special to do, were practically paralyzed with boredom. "I don't know why not," said their father. "I thought we'd look into the canal situation first. They're closer, but it's such a good day. Perhaps the sea would be nice." "Could you face another long drive so soon?" asked their mother. "Because if you liked, I don't mind." "No," said their father hurriedly. "I'll drive. You make the picnic." Roger could never understand why it took grown-ups so incredibly long to get ready for an outing. For his part, he sorted out and put back into the car the blow-up dinghy, pump and paddles, and the flippers and snorkels, and checked that the rug and folding chairs were in. Then he fetched a towel and rolled his bathing trunks in it, clapped a species of hat to his head before his mother had a chance to tell him to, and was ready. But of course no one else was, so he slipped away around the back of the chateau in hope of finding out when Melusine was leaving. The big black window of the kitchen was ajar, and he scrambled in as he had done the morning before. He felt this was all right, since Monsieur Serpais had seen him do it and not reproved him. The kitchen was empty. Even by day it was very dark and somehow threatening when there was no one in it. Roger noticed that the gun had been taken away. He wondered if Monsieur Serpais went shooting for game. Roger had never tasted game and was rather unsure what it was. Exactly, he used to think the phrase was shooting for a game. But he'd tasted, done, and seen so many new things since coming to France. He was more than game for some game if anyone should offer him any. He wouldn't mind, he thought, having a shot at some either. But both his parents had flatly refused to entertain the idea of buying a gun for him. He moved round the room idly, but apart from a couple of dark brown ham-like things hanging from the rafters, smoked goat haunch, together with strings of dried mushrooms and a bunch of withered leaves and a long, long rope of white garlic, beautifully plated. There was really nothing at all interesting. Everything was covered with layers of dirt, except one end of the long table, where the oilcloth had been kept wiped. To amuse himself, Roger counted the items carefully strewn about the table. He reached 37 and was wondering whether to count the rusty screws and nails as individuals or just the split tinfoil, when a voice behind him nearly made him jump out of his skin. Qu'est-ce que tu fais là? He spun round, his heart thumping. It was the ogre, of course, and there was the gun in both hands, not quite pointing at Roger, but definitely at the ready. And his question had been more like a snarl. Roger found himself backing against the table, looking at Monsieur Serpais' menacing figure lurking in the shadows near the outer door. All his French deserted him. I'm sorry. I was looking for Melusine, he stammered. The man began to shout at him. Roger couldn't understand a word, but he got the message. Get out and stay out. He lost no time. He ran to the window and scrambled out as fast as he could go, falling down into the grass outside, and for a few seconds lying there, winded, as if someone had hit him in the stomach. Then he got up and ran to the window of their own big room. From there he could hear the car horn blasting. He stumbled, panting around the back of the chateau, to find them all ready to leave, furious with him for keeping them waiting. He managed to calm down quite quickly in the car without telling anyone what had happened. By the time they'd reached La Rochelle, he'd practically forgotten about it. La Rochelle was quite a big town. It had an old port and a new port. It had an old part and a new part. The old part was the port, next to the sea, and its cobbled roads and masses of little shops and cafes were pointedly quite interesting, but not half as interesting to Roger and the twins just then as the beach. It was great, fantastic sand and waves just right for jumping, hot but not too... and waves just right for jumping, not too high to launch the dinghy. Their parents wouldn't let them use it on the ocean, if it were at all rough. Not after Emma, the twit, had allowed herself to be carried away with the current at Newport on their Welsh holiday, and had to be rescued by some fellows in a motorboat. They had an unblemished afternoon, quite a rarity, really. No grouses or sniping from the girls, no nagging or bellowing from parents, no chill half-hours of sunlessness, no sand in the picnic even, and their dad in a highly benign mood that meant unlimited ice cream and plenty of cooperation with pumping up and later patching the dinghy. Roger did look around from time to time to see if Melusine and her father might be anywhere about, but he didn't really expect to see them. Who could imagine the ogre in bathing trunks disporting himself on a beach like a human being? Roger found it difficult to imagine even Melusine just messing around having fun. By 4 o'clock, they'd run out of picnic food and had had enough of the beach. They got dressed, packed up, and between them carted all the stuff back up to the car. Always the worst part of any day out, especially the dinghy, which resisted deflation and was heavy with water and stuck on sand. Here, Em, you take the other end. No, I can't. I'm carrying the towels. All the towels? You're carrying your towel. Well, it's heavy. Just because you took the biggest, take the paddles at least. What's wrong with you taking them? You could carry them under your other arm. Polly, you give us a hand then, eh? Me, I'm carrying the chairs. Carry them both in one hand and hold the dinghy with the other, shouted Roger in exasperation. His good mood with his sisters had evaporated during this short exchange. just as it always did when they tried to get away with doing as little as possible. When girls started trading on being girls and expecting the men to do all the hard work, that really pissed him off. He didn't know where they learned it from. His mum did more than her share. He stumped off after his parents, with the pump and paddle somehow clutched in one hand and arm, dragging the damned dinghy after him across the sand and then across the stones. Of course, his father had to turn around and tell him not to drag it if he didn't want to get more punctures. The twins followed, lightly burdened and beginning to quarrel. Roger set his teeth. It looked as if it would be a ghastly drive back. The idea had been to load up the car and start the drive to avoid any risk of arriving after dark. The chateau, located in the remote countryside between two villages, was quite hard to find even by day along the maze of cart tracks that led to it. But suddenly their father decided that they had a half hour to spare, and that the grown-ups should perhaps have a coffee or a glass of wine in the old port to fortify them for the journey. "Can we have some chips?" asked Roger. "Be satisfied with all that ice cream," said his father, his benign mood abruptly a thing of the past. "Don't be such an Oliver." This reference to Oliver Twist's habit of asking for more was a family watchword, much unfairly applied in this case, Roger thought. He resented it. As whatever he wasn't greedy. He felt himself begin to sink into something like a sulk, which would really ruin the day good and proper if he didn't yank himself out of it. But sometimes he couldn't. This might well have been one of those times, except that as they were wandering through the narrow streets and the old-fashioned squares of the port, looking for a bar, Roger suddenly saw Melusine. She was standing by herself near the front of a small crowd, watching two street entertainers. They were a young man and woman dressed crazily in all sorts of bright-colored clothes, with lots of funny makeup on. The woman wore a turban, and she was pretending to be an Indian snake charmer. The man was the snake. He was crouching in a basket, doing a swaying sort of dance while she played a flute. Roger drew the family to a halt, and then they all watched and joined in laughter and applause. But Roger was watching Melusine more than the act. She hadn't seen him. She seemed not to have eyes for anything except the girl who was playing the music. She played very well, not just tootling. Later, Roger's father said the two were probably music students trying to eke out their grant. And it was the right kind of music, very Eastern sounding, not just phony Eastern either, but the real thing. And Melusine was moving to the notes, not dancing, but swaying, writhing her shoulders and arms, swaying her hips, her head making figure eights on her neck. Her eyes, round and black, stared through everything, fixed on the flute. Her mouth was slightly open, her tongue between her lips. Her whole body seemed possessed and commanded by the thin high notes, and Roger felt their power too, or some power. For a timeless moment he felt what it was like to be hypnotized. Only it was much more Melusine who had hypnotized him, not the music itself. His family, the crowd, the actors, the square, they all faded away into a sort of golden mist, like the river mist that had covered the ground that morning. Only Melusine, her writhing, swaying movements, her staring eyes remained real and effective to him. Watching was not an intense enough word for what he did to her. He drank her with his eyes. He knew that if she turned and beckoned to him, he would have to cross the open space between them and go to her. Suddenly he came to himself. Something had interfered with his trance. It was his mother nudging him. "Look, Roger, there's Melusine." He felt himself break into a sweat and began to shiver. He forced himself to answer as naturally as possible. Yes, I saw her. What is she doing?" "She's doing a snake dance better than the snake," said his father. "Come on, this is boring. Let's have our drink and get on our way." And that is the end of chapter 6.